She thought she was untouchable. A billionaire's fiancé, dripping in diamonds, mocked a black woman's natural skin at an exclusive gala. But what she didn't know was that this woman held a secret, one that would expose everything. And when the billionaire found out what really happened that night, he made a choice that shocked the entire elite world. Hit that like button and subscribe. This story has more twists than you can imagine. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. Let's begin. There's a world that most of us will never see. A world hidden behind velvet ropes and private security, where the air smells like old money and new champagne. It's a place where your net worth determines your worth as a person, and where the rules that apply to the rest of us simply don't exist. I'm talking about the world of the ultra-wealthy, the billionaires, the dynasties, the people who own entire cities and don't even realize it. And in this world, there was a gala. Not just any gala. The kind of event where a single table costs more than most people's annual salary. The kind of place where people smile with their teeth but not their eyes. The venue was the Grandview Estate, a sprawling mansion that overlooked the city like a throne overlooking a kingdom. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to touch the sky itself. The walls were lined with art worth millions, paintings that told stories of power and prestige. Waiters in perfectly pressed suits glided through the halls with trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than a car payment. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel small, even if you were somebody, especially if you weren't. And that's where our story begins. Not with a bang, but with a laugh. A cruel laugh that would echo through the halls of power and change everything. Let me introduce you to Victoria. She was the kind of beautiful that money could buy, even if beauty is something you're born with. Platinum blonde hair, always perfectly styled. Skin that had been treated with every expensive procedure known to science. She wore designer gowns like armor and diamonds like weapons. Victoria was engaged to one of the most successful men in the world, Jonathan Hartwell, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire in luxury real estate and hospitality, from nothing to everything. At least that's what the magazines said. But Victoria didn't care about how Jonathan made his money. She only cared about what his money could do for her. She cared about the status, the invitations, the way people's eyes would follow her as she walked into a room. Jonathan was the kind of handsome that came with success. Tall, confident, the kind of man who knew how to command a room without saying a word. But there was something distant about him, something that suggested he was always thinking about his next deal, his next conquest, even when he was surrounded by people who wanted nothing more than his attention. He wore his engagement to Victoria like he wore his Rolex, as an accessory. Something that looked good on his wrist, but that he didn't really think about. But there was a third person at that gala. Someone who didn't belong in that world, but who had earned her place through something that Victoria would never understand: actual accomplishment. Her name was Grace. Grace worked as an event coordinator for the Grandview Estate, at least that's what everyone thought. She moved through the halls with a clipboard and a professional smile, making sure that every detail was perfect. No one really noticed her. In a room full of people obsessed with being noticed, Grace had mastered the art of being invisible. But Grace had a secret. She wasn't just an event coordinator. By day, she worked at the Grandview. But by night, she was Dr. Grace Mitchell, one of the most respected dermatologists in the country. She had written papers on skin health across different ethnicities. She had been featured in medical journals and prestigious publications. She was the daughter of Dr. Samuel Mitchell, a legendary civil rights activist and philanthropist who had spent his life fighting for equality. Grace had taken this temporary position at the Grandview for research purposes. She was documenting beauty standards in elite circles, gathering data for a documentary that would expose the toxicity and racism embedded in high society. She was there to observe, to learn, to expose. She was there for a purpose that mattered. The evening unfolded like it always did. Wealthy people congratulating themselves on being wealthy, men talking about their acquisitions, whether they were companies or yachts, Women comparing their husband's net worth like they were comparing handbags. The air was thick with ego and expectation. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Grace was there, watching, taking mental notes, understanding every coded insult and microaggression that floated through the room like perfume. Then came the moment that changed everything. Victoria was standing near the grand staircase, a glass of Dom Perignon in one hand, her fiancé's arm draped around her waist like a trophy. She was talking to a group of women, all of them dressed in variations of the same designer collection, all of them laughing at jokes that weren't funny. And that's when she saw Grace. Grace was walking past, checking on the catering, making sure the evening ran smoothly. Grace's skin was dark and glowing. She wore her natural hair in beautiful braids adorned with gold. She wore minimal makeup because she didn't need to hide who she was. She was comfortable in her own skin in a way that Victoria could never be, no matter how much money she spent. And Victoria saw that. She saw that confidence, and it made her feel small. So she did what people like Victoria do when they feel small. She tried to make someone else feel smaller. "Oh my God," Victoria's voice cut across the room like a knife. "Look at her. I have to admire the bravery." The word hung in the air like a slap. To just walk around like that, with your skin showing, no corrective makeup, no, I don't know, coverage. She paused, her friends frozen in uncomfortable silence. Doesn't she know what real beauty looks like? One of her friends laughed, a nervous, guilty laugh. Victoria smiled, satisfied that she had won something. Grace kept walking. She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. But I want you to understand something. When someone mocks you for your race, when someone attacks your appearance because of the color of your skin, it doesn't matter if you don't react. The words still land. They still hurt. They still burrow into your chest and remind you that in some spaces, no matter what you accomplish, no matter how smart you are or how hard you work, your skin color will always be something that people feel comfortable attacking. It's a particular kind of cruelty. It's normalized cruelty. It's the kind of cruelty that people at galas think is witty. But here's where the story takes its first turn. Jonathan had stepped away to take a call. He was in another room, on another level, talking about another deal. He missed the entire thing. He didn't see his fiancée reveal her true nature. He didn't see the room go quiet with shame. He didn't see Grace's face, composed but hurt. When Jonathan came back, Victoria was back to her usual performance, and the moment had passed. That's the thing about moments like these. They happen so fast that by the time you process them, they're already history. But they're never really gone. They're seeds, and seeds grow. 3 days later, Jonathan was in his penthouse office, the kind of office that overlooks an entire city like it belongs to him. And he received an email. The email didn't have a signature. It was anonymous, but it contained a video file. Curious, Jonathan opened it, and what he saw made him go cold. It was the gala. It was Victoria. And it was her, laughing, mocking, being cruel. Not just to Grace, to other staff members, to people she thought were beneath her. There were clips of her being condescending to the hotel manager, clips of her making racist comments about the catering company's owner, clips of her being a genuinely terrible human being. And someone had compiled it all into one video. Someone had documented her cruelty. Someone had decided that Victoria should be held accountable. Jonathan watched it twice, the first time out of disbelief, the second time out of disgust. He had known Victoria for 5 years. They had been engaged for 3. And in all that time, he had chalked up her arrogance to wealth, her coldness to privilege. He had told himself that this was just how people like them acted. But watching that video, something shifted inside him. The distance he felt from her suddenly made sense. It wasn't that he didn't know her. It was that on some level, he had always known who she really was. He just hadn't wanted to face it. But here's where the story gets complicated, because it always does. The video leaked. Someone sent it to a gossip blogger. The blogger posted it online. Within hours, it had gone viral. Within a day, every major news outlet was talking about it. Hashtag Victoria Exposed was trending on social media. Screenshots of her worst moments were being shared across the internet. Think pieces were being written about entitlement and racism and the toxicity of elite culture. Victoria's family was devastated. Her mother stopped answering calls. Her father's business partners started distancing themselves. And Victoria herself disappeared. She hired a crisis management team, but there was no managing this crisis. She was radioactive now, untouchable in all the wrong ways. And Grace? Grace watched it all unfold from her small apartment, where she was editing footage for her documentary. She hadn't leaked the video. She knew it hadn't come from her, but she also knew that the universe had a sense of timing. She knew that sometimes justice doesn't come from action. Sometimes it just comes. This is where the second twist comes, and this is where the story becomes about something deeper than simple revenge. Jonathan made a decision. Everyone expected him to quietly dissolve the engagement, issue a brief statement, and move on. That's what powerful people do. They protect themselves. They circle the wagons. They make the problem disappear. But Jonathan did something different. He did something that shocked every person in his circle. He went public. He called a press conference. The media came in droves, expecting a statement about the end of his engagement. But what they got was so much more. Jonathan stood at a podium with controlled rage in his eyes, and he said this: "I was engaged to a woman who I now understand is capable of profound cruelty. I allowed myself to overlook warning signs because I was busy building my empire. I was distracted by profit margins and expansion plans. But while I was busy building my wealth, I failed to notice that the person next to me was tearing down the dignity of other people. And I take responsibility for that. I take responsibility for every time I should have said something and didn't. I take responsibility for being complicit through my silence." He paused. The room was completely quiet. "But I'm not here just to talk about Victoria. I'm here because what happened at the Grandview estate isn't unique. It's systemic. It's endemic to environments where money has replaced morality, where status has replaced character. And I've decided to do something about it." Then Jonathan announced the establishment of a massive foundation. Not a tiny charitable organization designed to make him look good at tax time. A real, significant foundation with substantial funding. The Mitchell-Hartwell Foundation, named after Grace's father and Jonathan himself. The foundation would focus on exposing workplace harassment, racism, and exploitation in luxury industries. It would provide legal support to employees who had been mistreated. It would fund documentaries and research into systemic inequality in elite spaces. It would be a tool for accountability. But that wasn't all. Jonathan had also launched an investigation into his own businesses. He wanted to know if his employees, his staff, the people who worked in his hotels and buildings had experienced mistreatment. And he promised that anyone who came forward would have his protection and his support. And he did something else, something that nobody expected. He reached out to Grace. They met in a coffee shop, not somewhere fancy, somewhere normal. Jonathan showed up alone, no security, no entourage, just a man who had realized something important about himself. Grace came because she was curious, because she wanted to understand. When they sat across from each other, the first thing Jonathan did was apologize, not for Victoria, but for himself, for being part of a system that had allowed her behavior to flourish, for not seeing her for who she really was, for being so focused on his own success that he had missed the suffering of people around him. Grace listened, and then she told him something that changed everything again. "I know who you are," she said. "Not just the billionaire, the real you, because I've been watching, not in a creepy way." She smiled slightly. "In a research way, I've been documenting this world for a project, and I've noticed that you're different. You ask staff members their names. You remember details about their lives. You treat people like people, even when you're distracted. So I know that the person I saw in that video, the one taking responsibility, that's the real Jonathan. Victoria wasn't who you thought she was, but she also wasn't who you are." Jonathan felt something shift inside him. It was the first time someone had seen both his failures and his potential at the same time and hadn't asked him to choose between them. "I want to help," he said. "With your documentary, with your research, with whatever you're building, not because I'm trying to fix myself, but because it matters." And that's exactly what happened. Over the next 6 months, Grace's documentary became a reality. Jonathan funded it entirely. But more than that, he provided access. He opened the doors to his world. He gave Grace permission to interview his employees, to document the power dynamics, to expose the rot underneath the glamour. The documentary, titled The Price of Beauty, premiered at one of the largest film festivals in the world. It was devastating and beautiful and necessary. Critics called it a watershed moment. Audiences sat in theaters and wept at the stories of mistreatment and resilience. It won awards. It sparked conversations that shook the very foundations of elite culture. And Grace became the face of a movement. Not because she had wanted fame, but because she had something that the world desperately needed: truth. Victoria, meanwhile, had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale. She had tried to salvage her reputation by issuing apologies that nobody believed. She had attempted comebacks on social media that were immediately shut down by her own followers. Her family's business had faced investigations. Her parents had essentially disowned her, more concerned with protecting their own image than with supporting their daughter. She had become the girl that no one wanted to know, the embodiment of consequences. Eventually, she left the country. She moved to a small town in Europe where nobody knew who she was. And while that might sound like a happy ending for her, it wasn't, because Victoria had built her entire identity on being noticed, on being envied, on being seen. And now she was invisible. It was her own personal hell, and it was entirely of her own making. But the real story, the real magic of what happened, wasn't about Victoria's downfall. It was about what Jonathan and Grace built in her absence. The Mitchell Hartwell Foundation became a force for genuine change. Within a year, it had supported over 200 employees in taking legal action against their employers. It had funded research into systemic racism in luxury industries. It had created a network where people could report harassment anonymously and receive protection. It had become a beacon for people who had been silenced for too long. And Jonathan changed too. He sold off some of his properties. He restructured his businesses to prioritize employee well-being. He took a significant pay cut to ensure that his staff were paid fairly. Did he do this because he wanted to be seen as a good person? Maybe at first. But over time, something genuine shifted. He understood that wealth without integrity is just a number in a bank account, that success without purpose is hollow, that power without compassion is just violence with better PR. Grace, meanwhile, became something that Victoria could never be. Respected. Not because of her appearance or her money or her connections, but because of who she was. Because of her intelligence and her courage and her refusal to be diminished by anyone. She spoke at universities. She consulted with major corporations on diversity and inclusion. She was interviewed by major publications. She was invited to the kinds of events that she used to work behind the scenes at, except now she was walking through the front door as a guest of honor. And the documentary didn't end there. It sparked a series, a movement. Other documentarians started making films about exploitation in other industries. Other wealthy people started examining their own complicity. It wasn't a revolution overnight, but it was a shift. A real, tangible, measurable shift in how people thought about accountability and class and power. I want you to understand something important. This isn't a story about revenge. This isn't a story about a bad person getting punished and a good person getting rewarded. This is a story about what happens when someone chooses to do better. When someone looks at the system they've benefited from and says, "This is wrong, and I'm going to change it." That's rare. That's powerful. That's the kind of thing that actually transforms the world. Victoria thought that her money made her untouchable. She thought that her wealth gave her the right to diminish other people. She thought that her status was a shield against consequences. She was wrong. She was spectacularly, publicly, irreversibly wrong. And the thing about that kind of wrongness is that it doesn't come from external punishment. It comes from the inevitable collision between who you are and how the world actually works. Jonathan thought that his wealth was separate from his humanity. He thought that he could build an empire without examining the foundation it was built on. He was wrong, too. But his wrongness led him somewhere different. It led him to accountability, to action, to change. And Grace knew who she was the whole time. She knew her value. She knew that mocking her wouldn't diminish her. Silence wouldn't erase her. An opportunity, when it came, wouldn't corrupt her. She used her platform not to punish the people who had hurt her, but to transform the system that had allowed that hurt to flourish in the first place. That's the real twist. That's the real ending. It's not that the bad person was destroyed and the good people won. It's that the good people recognized their responsibility to change things. And they did. As I finish this story, I want you to think about your own world, your own spaces. Where are you benefiting from a system that's hurting someone else? Where are you silent when you should be speaking? Where are you comfortable when someone else is being diminished? Because we're all part of systems that hurt people, and we all have the power to change them. It doesn't always require being a billionaire. Sometimes it just requires seeing someone clearly, understanding their pain, and deciding that their dignity matters more than your comfort. That's the real lesson. That's what I want you to take away from this story. If you loved this story, please smash that like button, subscribe for more untold stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear about karma in action. Drop a comment. Did you see that twist coming? Tell me what you think about Jonathan's choice. Was it redemption or was it just him trying to save his own image? I want to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.